الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram by Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, and we're still discussing matter that he have titled Bab Nawaqil al-Wudu. So discussing matters, things that nullifies one wudu. And inshallah ta'ala today we're picking up from the 8th hadith in this series of those hadith that the author rahimahullah have mentioned regarding things that are said to be things that nullifies one wudu. So as the normal system, that we'll read the hadith and then we'll have a discussion of the hadith. So the hadith will be read first in English, then the hadith will be read in Arabic, and then we have a discussion regarding different matters that pertain to the hadith, and of that, the ahkam that can be taken from this particular hadith. So the hadith will be read, and then we'll go into the discussion of the hadith. Bi'awnillahi ta'ala. Tafaddal.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Hadith number 69, narrated Aisha radiallahu anha. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever vomits, bleeds through the nose or releases madhi, urethral discharge, should go away, perform ablution and then complete his salat by continuing from where he had stopped at on condition that he does not speak in the process. Reported by Ibn Majah, Ahmed and others graded it da'if, weak.
So that's the hadith that been mentioned here regarding that relate to the topic of things that nullifies one wudu, and of those things that is mentioned in the hadith is regarding concerning certain things that nullifies wudu. So as for the hadith that been mentioned by the author rahimahullah, he mentioned an Aisha, yani al-Mu'mineen radiyallahu anha, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من أصابه قي أو رعاف أو قلس أو مذي فلينصرف فليتوضأ ثم ليبني على صلاتي وهو في ذلك لا يتكلم. Then he mentioned أخرجه Ibn Majah, ضعفه أحمد وغيره. So this is the hadith that has been mentioned by the author rahimahullah, and the topic of this particular hadith is discussed concerning these things that I mentioned. So things of the person throwing up, vomiting, does this nullifies one wudu. So that would be the topic of our discussion inshallah ta'ala. So as for the other matter to be discussed that they have mentioned here, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that they have mentioned this particular hadith to discuss the matter regarding discuss the matter regarding things like vomiting, ru'af, that the person having a nosebleed, also qalas or qalas wal madhi, does these things actually nullifies one wudu. So we'll go into a discussion regarding which of these things nullifies one wudu and which may not, and what's the aqwal of the ulama pertaining to this matter. As for the hadith that have been mentioned, the hadith of Aisha radhiyallahu anha, that first thing regarding concerning takhrij of the hadith. So as for this particular hadith that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah he mentioned, akhrajahu Ibn Majah, that hadith have been mentioned by Ibn Majah rahimahullah. The ulama have mentioned regarding concerning that this hadith is of the hadith that is only found amongst Kutub al-Sitta, only with Ibn Majah. So amongst Kutub al-Sitta, which will be Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasahi, Ibn Majah, that this hadith is only found with Ibn Majah and not found in the remaining books of hadith, of the 6 books of hadith. So this is of the hadith that somebody mentioned that Ibn Majah is the only one who have collected or mentioned this particular hadith, whereas the other books of hadith does not mention this hadith. Also there's a discussion regarding this particular hadith. So there's a discussion regarding the hadith. So as for takhrij, they mention the hadith is found in Ibn Majah. Also the hadith is found in Tabarani, in his book Al-Awsat. The hadith can be found in with Ibn Adi in his book Kamil, also Daraqutni, Bayhaqi, who mentioned hadith in several books. So Bayhaqi also mentioned this in several of his books, of those Al-Kubra, Khilafiyat, Wal-Ma'rifah. So this hadith these are the sources of where the hadith can be found. So of the sources of this hadith, Ibn Majah, others, Tabarani in his book Al-Awsat, Ibn Adi in his book Kamil, Daraqutni, Bayhaqi in several of his books. So Bayhaqi have mentioned this hadith in several of his books. So as concerning the source of this hadith, then this particular hadith, you find that Ash-Shawkani in his book Nail Autar, that he went into some discussion regarding this hadith. He went into discussion regarding this hadith does others. So the criticism of this hadith, they mention this hadith have been criticized by the ulama of hadith. They are mentioned regarding concerning of those reasons that this particular hadith, that one of the narrators or of the narrators, the hadith is narrated on Ismail ibn Iyash, Ismail ibn Iyash, and Ibn Jurayj, and Ibn Abi Mulaika, and Aisha. Al-Hadith. So the hadith is come by way of Ismail ibn Iyash. As for this narrator, is Ismail ibn Iyash, that is mentioned to be one who's a thiqah when he narrates hadith from the people of his region, which is Sham. So his narration, Ismail, his narration of hadith from narrators from upon others from his region of Sham, then those hadith are said to be credible. They are authentic. Or as for if Ismail ibn Iyash narrates hadith from people outside of his region, then those hadith are said to be weak. So he's looking at the person that he narrates upon, which is an Ibn Jurayj. So Ibn Jurayj is from Al-Hijaz. So Ibn Jurayj is from Hijaz, so it's outside of the region of Ismail. So with that, the hadith is said to be, as mentioned, that because Ibn Jurayj is from Hijaz, then those narration by Ismail upon Ibn Jurayj is said to be weak. It is classed as hadith which is weak. So that's concerning of those things that have been discussed regarding this particular hadith. Then also you find that of the ulama who have mentioned that of the second criticism of this hadith, the second criticism of this hadith is that in most of the narrations that have been mentioned, or other narration of the hadith, that the hadith is narrated, they said mursala, contrary to the narration that we have here. So the narration that we have here, it gives a full isnad. We said the criticism of Ismail ibn Iyash, narrated by Ibn Jurayj, but also in other turuq of the hadith. Then there's this hadith is mentioned that the narrator it is said concerning which is the narration of Abdul Malik ibn Jurayj and Abihi ibn Jurayj, which is Abdul Aziz ibn Jurayj and Nabi alayhi salam. So there's no mention of any Sahabi. So the person which is Abdul Aziz ibn Jurayj who narrates direct upon the Prophet alayhi salam. So that's mentioned the hadith by this is mursala. So the hadith is mursal, and you find the likes of Ahmad bin Hanbal that have taken this position regarding, as he mentioned, as Naqla ibn Adi and Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah qal anna sawaba, that the correct position, and Ibn Jurayj and Abihi and Nabi alayhi salam mursala. So this narration that come by the second method or the second path or tariq, then it is considered to be mursal, where that this tabi'i is narrating directly upon the Prophet alayhi salam. So you have those criticisms of this hadith, also some narration that is muttasil. Then we have criticism of some narrators, other ones that they have criticism by way of it not being muttasil. The other one is muttasil. It is criticized by some narrators being weak, and the one which is ghayr muttasil, which is mursal, then those narration are said to then automatically becomes weak because of the isnad is not complete. So that's concerning that particular hadith. You find that Abu Hatim, so you find many of the ulama of hadith that have somewhat criticized this particular hadith. So amongst those who have criticized the hadith regarding the hadith being mursal or being weak, that you have Ahmad bin Hanbal, Al-Dhuhali, Abu Zur'a, Abu Hatim Al-Razi, Darakutni, Bayhaqi, Ibn Salah, and others, and others who have somewhat all this hadith to be da'if. And also they add to list of those who have criticized the hadith, that as we had mentioned, those, we have An-Nawawi of Muqa'a, we have Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, we have Ibn Abi al-Hadi al-Hanbali. So all those are somewhat criticized this hadith. So all those ulama of the past, and also those of those who came after, that they have all criticized this hadith, that have been mentioned by Author rahimahullah, to the extent where Ibn Hajar rahimahullah qal ضعفه Ahmad wa ghayru, that this hadith have been held or graded as daif by Ahmad ibn Hanbal and others. So those others are the list that we have mentioned. So those others that have also criticized this hadith as being weak, we have Al-Dhuhali, Abu Zur'a, Abu Atim, Darakutni, Bayhaqi, An-Nawawi, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, mentioned Ibn Salah, Ibn Abdul Hadi al-Hanbali, and others. So this hadith is somewhat as considered to be da'if. So that's concerning the hadith that they mentioned by Author rahimahullah ta'ala. That Ibn Bayhaqi rahimahullah I've mentioned regarding An-Shafi قال الشافعي أنه قال في الحديث ابن جريج عن أبيه ليست هذه الرواية بثابت عن النبي عليه السلام, that this narration is not thabit, authentic upon the Prophet عليه السلام. So this hadith have been somewhat criticized by the ulama. This hadith have been criticized by the ulama as being weak. So the next of those matters regarding concerning this particular hadith, so the hadith regarding that these acts that they nullify wudu, then as we mentioned, the hadith had been stated here that is considered to be weak. So as for the next that he discussed, which is Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he mentioned regarding concerning that the meaning of the wording of the hadith, the meaning of the wording of the hadith, he mentioned man asabahu qay, man asabahu qay. So he mentioned al-qay is what we say in English would be vomit. So it's concerned with the mention ilqa ma akala aw sharab, where the person is like throwing up that which he has eaten or have drunk. So that's concerning, and some mentions the person throwing up those, the person that that so throwing up those things that is from the person's stomach. So it's concerning what is al-qay, which is vomit. Then I mentioned the second matter that is discussed in the hadith, ru'af. So ru'af, also they mentioned that ru'af is khuruj ad-dam min al-anf, where the person like have a nosebleed. So ru'af is the person have a nosebleed. So the person in this case is have a nosebleed. So is emitting or ejecting of blood from his nose. So they mentioned that so that is concerning ru'af. Then they mentioned the third thing that is mentioned, that they mentioned al-qalas or qals. So you have al-qalas or qalsun. So that's concerning, which is they mentioned that khuruj min batnihi. So what is qals? They mentioned kharaja min batnihi ta'am or sharab ila al-fam, where the person has somewhat that he things is things that are emitted or emitted from his stomach that through his mouth up until to his mouth. So that's concerning what they mentioned regarding that these things that have been mentioned. So you have vomiting, or a person having a nosebleed, or a person that just throwing up things that gurgitating thing in his mouth. So all of these things that they mention nullifies wudu. And the fourth thing that is mentioned, al-madhi. So al-madhi, which is the person have this discharge by way of the person being sexually aroused, as we had covered before. So al-madhi, when a person is like sexually aroused, then the person will have this type of discharge. So we already covered concerning the ahkam regarding al-madhi previously. So these are the four things that I mentioned in hadith, that the Prophet mentioned, alayhi salam, man asabahu qay, or ra'af, or qalas, or madhi. Then he mentioned falyansarif. Then a person should leave his salat, falyatawadda, or the person should leave and perform al-wudu. Then he mentioned thumma la yabni ala salat, in the person that he should continue from where he have left in his salat. So the person have prayed, is still held, and the person will just continue from where he have left off from his salat. Then I mentioned وَهُوَ فِي ذَلِكَ لَا يَتَكَلَّمُ, and the person in doing this, of leaving the salat, going to perform wudu, and to return, he should not speak. That he should not speak throughout this. So that's concerning what is meant by this particular hadith. So the person in leaving, not to speak, or to communicate, nor performing al-wudu, not to communicate, then a person come back and he will just complete what he has left off of his salat. So for example, if the person was praying salatul dhuhr, and the person had that vomit, and he's already in, and he's in the salah, or he had a nosebleed, and he's in salat, according to this hadith, then a person, then he should leave his salah, go and make wudu, but during this, is not to speak. So for example, he already prayed rakatain, or he prayed 3 rakah. So he leave at the 3rd rakah, go make wudu, by renewing of his wudu, while doing so, not to speak, then he will return back to the salat and perform 1 rakah. According to this particular hadith, according to this hadith. So whatever remain of his salat, then a person will complete what remain, and that will be the completion of his salah. So they mention regarding concern, but doing this, the person not to speak. Doing this, the person not to speak. So that's concerning the meaning of the hadith. As for what now the ahkam, the Shaykh mentioned regarding concerning of those things that of the hadith discussed concerning that the person who from the hadith, it kind of indicates that from this hadith is an evidence that is used to prove that these acts nullifies one wudu. That these acts nullifies one wudu. So by way of vomiting, nosebleed, throwing up, and also madhi, all these acts nullifies one wudu. All these acts, if they were to occur, nullifies one wudu. So of the ulama, they mentioned that is masala is discussed regarding that أن الخارج النجس. So the ulama who mentioned that any of these things that they were to occur, then this will nullify one wudu. They'll nullify one salah. So the person's salat, it becomes nullifies, and also for the person wudu becomes also invalid. So those of the ulama who take this view regarding that these things that nullifies one wudu, that they have mentioned that ru'af annahu naqid, that is naqil al wudu, that is the position, and also al qalas wal kay, that these three matters that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and also Imam Ahmad rahimahullah take the position that these things nullify one wudu, even though between them they have a tafsil. So between them they have an explanation where they kind of somewhat they draw the line by saying that anything that comes from the person, that comes out from the person that is said to be najis, it nullifies one's wudu. So they mention khullu kharij najas min al-badan, anything that is said to be impure that comes outside from the body, from the person's body, then it nullifies one wudu. It nullifies one wudu. So that's concerned. So for them, that the person having blood bleeding, whether through by the nose or any other part of the body, will nullify wudu, because it's something coming from internal, from inside the person to outside. And these things, according to them, they claim it to be najas. So based upon this, that they hold that the personal wudu is nullified. So that's concerned to the general principle that they follow or guideline they follow. Anything that is impure, that comes from, is expelled from the person's body, then it nullifies one's wudu. Then also, they use this hadith as their proof, the hadith of the Bab as their evidence, as one of their evidence. Also, they use another hadith with the hadith they mentioned, the hadith of Ma'dan ibn Abi Talha and Abi Darda ta'ala anhu, أن رسول عليه السلام قاها فأفطر فتوضأ فلقيت ثوبان. So then Ma'dan, he says فلقيت ثوبان, so he met another companion, Thawban. So Abi Darda narrate that hadith, the Prophet ﷺ قاء فأفطر, the Prophet ﷺ, that he vomit and he broke his fast, فتوضأ, and he made wudu. So فقال لقيت ثوبان, so the narrator who's Ma'dan ibn Abi Talha said, I met Thawban في المسجد دمشق, that I met him in a masjid in Damascus. فذكرت ذلك له, and I mentioned what was said by Abi Darda تعالى عنه. قال يعني الثوبان صدق, that he has spoken truth. أنا صببت له وضوه, I was the one who poured for him his water, for the Prophet ﷺ to make wudu. So by this so they mention, so that's the evidence that they use regarding this matter. As for this particular hadith, that this hadith that is also used as a claim that wudu is nullified by vomiting, that this hadith is found in At-Tirmidhi, Ahmad, but in some narration of the hadith, that the wording concerning that it mentioned, in some narration already mentioned qaha fa'aftar, without mention fatawadda. So some narration does not include the word fatawadda, that he performed wudu. It only mentioned qaha fa'aftar, that he vomit and he broke his fast, without mention falyatawadda, that he renewed his wudu. So that's concerning that hadith that is mentioned. At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah, when he mentioned that, فقال, that قال هذا أصح شيء في هذا باب, this is the most reliable hadith in this chapter, or in this discussion. So in this discourse, this discussion, this hadith is considered to be, as we determined, the most reliable hadith on that matter. So with this matter, then they all that those are the evidence that they use to say the Prophet ﷺ that vomited, it broke his fast, but also he renewed his wudu. So they said based upon this, that it proves that vomiting nullifies one wudu. So that's the first position taken by the ulama. I said that position taken by Ahmad bin Hanbal and also Imam Abu Hanifa alayhim rahmatullah tabaraka ta'ala. The second position of the ulama regarding vomiting and the likes that we have mentioned nullifies one wudu, which is nosebleed and the likes, that their position that these things, that أن الخارج النجس من غير سبيلين, that anything which is said to be najas, that is expelled from other or discharged from other than the person private parts, the front and the back, لا ينقل الوضوء, it doesn't nullify wudu. So vomiting, nosebleed, throwing up, with them does not nullify wudu. Does not nullifies one wudu. As for those who take this position, we have Imam Ash-Shafi'i, Malik, and also a riwayah, and Imam Ahmed rahimahullah, that it does not nullifies one wudu. Also of others, we have the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, also he have chosen that position. Also Ash-Shawkani, of recent, we have also of contemporaries, we have Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di, also Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, that they have the position that this matter does not nullifies one wudu. So also we have Ibn Hazm also of this position, also Sheikh Albani, and also Sheikh Mu'bid ibn Hadi al-Wadi, and also Ibn Uthaymeen. So these are the ulama who take the position that vomiting does not nullifies one wudu. So again, of those, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Abu Thur, of addition, riwayah and Imam Ahmed rahimahullah, that it does not nullifies one wudu. Also of those who aligned to this position, Ibn Hazm, Al-Zahiri, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, also Shawkani, Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di, Sheikh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, Sheikh Mu'bid ibn Hadi al-Wadi, and also Sheikh Albani alayhim rahmatullah jami'an. So that's concerning the aqwal of the ulama regarding this particular matter. As for the evidence that they use to come to that conclusion, one, they kind of somewhat state that the hadith that are used are daif. So the hadith that is used by the hadith of Aisha rata anha, that hadith is said to be daif. Also, as they use as proof also, they mention regarding that one, the hadith of Jabir, that I mentioned that Akissa, that is a story concerning the story of Abbad ibn Bishr. So you have the story of Abbad ibn Bishr, fi ghazwatul Dhatul Riqa. So one of the battles that occurred, that it is mentioned that he was somewhat shot with, he was injured, and as was bleeding a lot. So he was bleeding a lot, and he was in the salat, and he continued. So he was hit by an arrow, he was bleeding a lot while in the salah, and he still continue. What's the amir fi salati, that he still continue in his salat, even though he was losing blood. So it shows regards, I said, no, based upon this, that the person was losing of blood, so, and he still continue in his salat. And I mentioned that, that occurred, yes, with a Sahabi regarding this battle, but I mentioned that, it is somewhat, they see it as it is difficult, it is far-fetched that the Prophet ﷺ would not know of this. So this incident where the person was in one of the battles, the Prophet ﷺ was still present, was concerning Ghazwat Dhat Riqa. So the Prophet ﷺ must have known about what happened, and he did not criticize or directed him regarding renew his salat and the likes. So they mentioned the Prophet ﷺ, by not saying the person by this incident that the salat was invalid, then they mentioned that it stated the person's salat is considered to be still valid until he was told otherwise, and nothing was told otherwise regarding his salat. So his salat is considered to be sahih. The second evidence that they use, they call al-bara al-asliyah. So one of the also what concern al-qawaid al-fiqhiyah, that I mentioned that wujub al-baqa ala bara al-asliyah, no, everything remain upon its original ruling until there's something to say otherwise. So they mentioned that, matters regarding what nullifies wudu, the person need an evidence to say such a particular thing invalid one's wudu. And there's nothing that is authentic and credible regarding that these acts nullifies, or some of these acts nullifies one wudu, which is things of vomiting and the likes. So they mentioned that, so it remains that one have to bring clear evidence and authentic evidence, valid evidence, that these acts are nullifies one wudu, and there's no authentic, yes, there's hadith about it, but they're not authentic. And the person should only act upon hadith that are graded as authentic. And this hadith that is used is daif. Then I mentioned that as in response to the hadith of, but even though all of the hadith they use concern the case of the person regarding that matter, with the case of the hadith of Jabir, that the hadith have been criticized, the hadith in the Abu Dawud, Ahmed, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban. So the hadith of Jabir, that he was injured in a salah while in the battle of Dhatil Riqa, that they mentioned, this hadith, it is found in a place like in Abu Dawud Ahmed, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban, but there's some discussion regarding one of the narrators in this hadith. So there's some discussion regarding this hadith authenticity, and the hadith is considered, the hadith is criticized, the hadith of Jabir is criticized, where there's narrated that the hadith is said to be da'if. So that's concerned that matter, but they go back to the original ruling, which is that to say anything is bara asliya, that one needs to provide a clear, authentic evidence that vomiting, nosebleed nullifies one wudu. And according to them, they say there's no such authentic narrations. Also, they cannot respond. Those who say that the person's wudu is still intact, not invalid by these acts. They mention concerning the hadith of Ma'dan ibn Abi Talha and Abi Darda anhu regarding the Prophet ﷺ, that he vomited and he broke his siyam, broke his fast. Fatawadda. They mention that one, the word fatawadda, that hadith is under that wording is under discussion in the hadith. And also they mention even if the hadith is said to be authentic with his wording of he perform his wudu, that's by way of something that's mentioned that that only proves that regarding concern that the Prophet ﷺ, it is something which is mustahab to be done, not wajib. So the person was to perform, the person was to vomit, it is encouraged and preferred for a person to renew his wudu, not by way of wujub, but by way of istihbab, of something preferred to be done, not that it's something which is a must to be done. So the Prophet ﷺ, by way of an act, it doesn't mean that it is something which is wajib. So a mere act that the Prophet ﷺ may fulfill or carry out, it is considered to be something which is mustahab until there's other evidence to raise it, elevate it to being something which is wajib. So even to the extent where Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, قال إذا توضأ من الرعاف, that if the person was to perform wudu from a nosebleed, فهو أفضل, it is something which is better. ولا يجب عليه, but is not compulsory upon him, في أظهر قولي العلماء, for the more correct view of the two position or the disagreement between the ulama. So that's concerning that matter. So they mention that, that for the person who may have a nosebleed, the person who may vomit, that it is more preferred for the person to make wudu, but not wajib. It's not wajib upon them, it's not compulsory upon them to do so. So that's concerning those aqwal of the ulama on that matter. And Allahu alam, that view regarding it is something which is said not wajib but mustahab, for the person to renew his wudu if he was to vomit or have a nosebleed, but it's not wajib to be done. It's not wajib to be done. So not wajib to be done if the person is salat, he doesn't have to break his salat. So the person says it is not wajib that the person was to a nosebleed or to throw up or to have something come up in his mouth during the salat, then that doesn't nullify his salat. But if the person is able to, if it was occur inside salat, then the person will continue his salat. But if the person is outside salat, then it is advised for the person to make wudu before they pray. So that's the qawl of qawl al-thani, which is the qawl of the ulama who mention, or jumhur of the ulama that mention it is doesn't nullifies, one who does not nullifies one wudu, but preferable for a person to renew their wudu. As for the matter regarding madhi, we have somewhat discussed that matter regarding concerning in this series of things that I mentioned, that madhi, as we had mentioned before, that it nullifies one wudu. So the person have this discharge of madhi, then it does nullifies one wudu. So the person in that case would renew his wudu, as we had covered before regarding this particular type of discharge of al-madhi. So as for the hadith mentioned at the time, from what is taken from the hadith, that a person was to throw up or have a nosebleed and have madhi and he's in salat, then for the person to break his salat, go and perform al-wudu without speaking, then return back to the salat and complete from where he have left off. But I will mention that this hadith is daif, so this hadith is not to be applied. This hadith is daif, so it is not to be applied. So that's concerning what is mentioned regarding this particular hadith. So this is what is mentioned, or the ahkam that can be taken from this particular hadith. So if you find that the author of the book, which is Fathul Alam, that when he discussed concerning those three matters regarding al-qay, wal-qalas, wal-ru'af, separately regarding concerning what is said. So in those matters you find that he mentioned ru'af, that nose bleeding, that he mentioned that on this matter the khilaf between the ulama, ذهب عطاء والنخعي وقتادة والثوري وأحمد إلى أنه ينقل الوضوء, that ru'af, the person of a nosebleed, that it nullifies one wudu. So it was mentioned, and it mentioned وصح and Ibn Umar أنه كان إذا رعف ذهب فتوضأ, that Ibn Umar رضي عنه, that رضي عنهما, that if he had a nosebleed, that he would go and perform al-wudu. ثم رجع, then he returned, ويبني آلا يبني ما مضى ولم يتكلم كما في الأوسط. But I mentioned the hadith that mentioned this is daif. The hadith of that is mentioned by Ibn Hajar in the book is daif, the hadith of Aisha that went through that formula or that system regarding what to be done. Then as for the next position or the next qawl of the ulama regarding ru'af, nosebleed, they mentioned ذهب طاووس سالم محكول ربيع مالك شافي أبو ثور رجه ابن المنذر وهو الصحيح إلى أن رعاف لا ينقل الوضوء, that ru'af, that nosebleed does not nullifies one wudu. So you find the likes of Taus, Salim, Mahkul, Rabi'a, Malik, Shafi, Abu Thur, Ibn Munzir, and we mention others of contemporaries that they take the position that ru'af does not, nosebleeding does not nullifies, nosebleeding does not nullifies one wudu. Why? Because there is no evidence, no authentic hadith on this matter, even though there is hadith on this matter, but the hadith, they are not authentic. So based upon this, regarding it directly nullifying one wudu, so they kind of somewhat stick to the bara al-asliya, to the original ruling, which is you have to prove that these things nullify wudu from a authentic, reliable hadith. So that's concerned that matter. Then you have a third opinion regarding nosebleed mentioned, because ذهب بعضهم إلى التفريق بين قليل وكثير, that of those ulama mentioned that make a distinction regarding in nosebleed, the person might have a nosebleed that is a very heavy nosebleed or not very heavy. So the person might have a small amount of bleeding from his nose, or a person have a heavy amount of bleeding from his nose. Then they made a distinction. So they mentioned that distinction regarding concerning the heavy bleeding requires wudu, and a small amount of bleeding does not require wudu, according to that distinction. But I mentioned that position that ghayru sahih, as there's no dalil for it. There's no dalil to make that distinction regarding nosebleed, where it is of heavy, a lot of bleeding, or a small amount of bleeding, that there's no evidence for this. So based upon this, so these are aqwal of the ulama on this particular matter. So this, inshallah ta'ala, we have covered most of this particular hadith that discuss one of those things that is said to be of those things that nullify one wudu, which is the main topic of the hadith relating to those things regarding ru'af, nosebleed, qay, vomiting, qalas, and also al-madhi. So mention as for those only madhi nullifies one wudu, as discussed before. As for the other form of throwing up and vomiting and nosebleed, then this does not nullifies one wudu. So that inshallah ta'ala will end this session and continue discussing other of the hadith. So this hadith is considered, as we mentioned, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that you have mentioned over, this is the 8th hadith regarding things that nullifies one wudu. So he mentioned this is the 8th hadith regarding of those things that are said to be things that nullifies one wudu. And inshallah ta'ala we'll discuss the next topic based upon the other hadith that are mentioned after regarding other things that are mentioned as things that nullifies one wudu. With this inshallah ta'ala will end. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You good? No up there? That word, I didn't use that word too much.